All right, thanks, Stephen, and welcome everybody to the final day of your training. Hopefully you've had a great time this week and learned a lot. I know that I have, and this has energized me, and I hope it's done the same for you, getting us back to our roots of conservation planning, focusing on the importance of that, but then also the important part of how do we bring that into our new business tools of CART. So we're going to continue on that same subject, and we will get right into it. But first of all, let's see if there are any questions from what you've heard earlier this week, whether that was on Monday, if you can remember that far back. If you remember, we covered the general planning overview, planning criteria and CART overview. Then on Tuesday or Thursday, we went into more of the details of the resource inventories. So I'm going to pause here just real quick to see if there's any questions. As a reminder, you can either enter those into the chat, or you can unmute your line and ask the question, or raise your hand, and Stephen will call on you to ask your question. Let me give you a minute to think about that. All right. Well, if at any time during today or in the future you have questions, by all means, reach out to your area resource management specialists or your state office experts, and we will get you an answer. And if we don't have it, we will find one and make sure we have some consistent guidance out there for you. All right. You've learned what we need to think about when we're out on the land. Now we're going to bring it all into CART. Okay. And as a reminder, right now as an agency, we have kind of two sets of planning criteria, one of those being the old-fashioned way that we used to do. But of course, now with most of our priority work being accessed through CART, CART is likely going to be your method of choice for assessing resource concerns against planning criteria. First and foremost, when you get into CART, of course, the first thing you need to look at is your land uses and your land use modifiers. This is the list of the national land uses on your left and the land use modifiers on your right. Just for your information, by our testing and our knowledge of CART, the ones that are circled do not do much of anything in CART itself related to planning criteria. Okay, and I say that these that really don't matter yet, because as you know, there's one constant thing in this agency, and that is change. So I'm just going to encourage our certified planners in Indiana, get used to tagging the correct land use modifier now, even if it may not make a difference, because someday CART may be reprogrammed, and these modifiers will be very important. Okay, you can't see that one below, but that is HAYED. HAYED. Sorry about that for my circle blocking that word. But the other modifiers, irrigated, does trigger some additional resource concerns, some additional data. Of course, wildlife, as Brianne went over in her presentations, is required if you're going to assess wildlife habitat as an objective on the land. Drained, just a little more information. Drained, again, if you can see evidence of drainage on the land, whether that's surface drains, subsurface tile, so on and so forth, document it. Otherwise, ask the farmer. Probably most of our land, especially in northern and central Indiana, is likely drained by some means, but make sure you tag that, especially on your cropland. As a reminder, water feature is an important one for assessing bank erosion. And then the organic modifier is required to trigger the organic ranking pools for subsequent program application ranking in CART. So let's go through a very critical one. And again, this is pretty much only required for CSP, where CSP requires us to assess bank erosion if we have a water feature on our land unit. But the important thing here to think about is, what is the land use? So bottom left corner, what's the land use adjacent to that water feature? Give me some shout outs, please. Chat it up. Unmute your mic. What's our land use on the bottom left?
AAL.
Perfect. Perfect.
That's from Jennifer Kipper.
Hey, good job, Jennifer. Much appreciated. Of course, the majority of the land use is cropland. But right next to the water feature is associated ag. That's really important, especially for a program like CSP, because again, we're giving you clarification that water feature should be immediately adjacent to it, and that's the land use that you assess with the bank erosion. So now let's take that again further into our CSP. Let's assume that bottom left photo, that buffer is under the Conservation Reserve Program. So since CRP is not eligible for CSP, that associated ag land is not eligible for CSP. Therefore, we do not need to assess bank erosion for that CSP application because our CSP conservation plan / contract ends at that cropland CRP associated ag land interface. Make sense? It's a rhetorical question. I hope it does. Bottom right, a little bit different scenario, isn't it? Again, on these types of situations where our cropland is immediately adjacent to our water feature, we would tag the water feature to our CSP application, for example, to that cropland and assess the condition of that bank. Okay. Hopefully that serves to clarify things. Again, we kind of learned this as we went through last year's CSP, but wanted to make sure we kind of cover that real quickly. Just as another reminder, another hard lesson we learned last year, if we change, whether that be add, delete, modify our land uses or our modifiers after we've already done some work in CART, it'll wipe out what you've already done. So again, it's really important to kind of get those decisions up front as early as in the CART process as possible so that your efficiencies are maximized. You don't have to redo a lot of data entry. And as many of you know, especially on the CSP, these are large number of PLUs, large numbers of large farm acreage. That can be a lot of work that you have to redo. So just as a reminder, do your best to capture all of these up front as early in the process as possible. Again, whether that's in Conservation Desktop or whether that's in CART, that will save you many headaches and many clicks later. Comments and questions on this concept real quick. I'll pause real quick. Okay, let's continue. And another reminder, if a resource concern is not applicable to that land use, do not tag it in CART. This again is a hard lesson that we learned, that again, if you tag a resource concern and you don't have the appropriate land use or the appropriate land use modifier also tagged, you cannot assess it. And as you get to the end, it will show that you do not meet that resource concern. Case in point, water feature. If you select bank erosion and assign it to a PLU without that water feature land use, if you tag bank erosion resource concern to a planning land unit without the water feature modifier, CART will not bring up the bank erosion resource concern for you to answer. But when you get to the end, CART will say bank erosion not met. So again, it's really important to make sure you pay attention to the documents that we gave you, and anywhere where you have an NA or an inappropriate land use modifier, make sure you don't tag that resource concern. Otherwise, you will be frustrated at the end of your CART tenure. And then again, if you do that, you'll have to go back to the beginning, assign that modifier, or take out that land use, and then you'll start over, and you will have no fun in the planning process. Okay, with that, are there any quick questions on that brief summary of land uses and land use modifiers? All right, well, hearing none, we will turn it over to Stephanie McLean.
All right, good morning, everyone. I'm going to before I get going today, pop a few links for you in your in the chat boxes that we have here. The tech note for the infield soil health assessment was actually just released yesterday. And so I just wanted to pop in there the actual bulletin and then the tech note, just so you guys can see that it's out, that it's official, that I wasn't, filling you full of crap when I told you it's going to be coming really soon. They actually did it. Yay! So here we go. That being said, we're gonna let's see here. I'm looking at all my things that I have open, thinking, man, that's a bad idea, Stephanie. Let's not have all those things open here. All right, but we'll get this one rolling. So Shannon asked me to talk about tying soil health and CART, so we're going to tie it all together. Happily being in the field talking about soil health. All right. Shannon, everyone can see my slide? We're good to go here?
Yes, Stephanie.
Yep.
Thank you, Stephen.
Yep.
All right, so there was maybe at one of the program meetings a couple weeks ago, I kind of highlighted that there had been some changes within CART to our soil health resource concerns. The questions that I kind of live and breathe on are the cover residue biomass question, and then the questions pertaining to organic matter depletion. I'm not even going to say them, right? Pertaining to the soil health resource concerns. And so some of the things that we saw change across the board with CART was that there's no longer references to SCI or other things like that, because again, those tend to come from the tools that we use after our applications are funded. And so they wanted to try to more describe scenarios, or the national office wanted to take those things out. And so that was removed for the cover residue biomass question, and as well as the soil health resource concerns questions, because I'm sure you noticed that all of those questions are very similar. In addition, the soil health resource concerns had a high value added to the categories. Last year there was just a none, low, and medium, and no high. But now they added a high. So it better aligns the soil health resource concerns and that inventory process, or that assessment process in CART, with the cover residue biomass assessment. So here's just a clip screen from the Indiana guidance that's that spreadsheet or tool that we use for that inventory process, which has our national reference for the existing condition and the Indiana guidance to the right of it. And again, this is for that cover residue biomass question. And so one of the things that we did, and as we worked through this process, is we made the decision right away that because the cover residue biomass inventory process and the soil health resource concerns, or 3 of the 4 soil health resource concerns, have the exact same format and they have the exact same categories, we wanted the guidance from Indiana to be the same. So that none, low, wait a second. I always say medium, but it's actually moderate. I don't know which world you guys live in, but where I live, medium is kind of in between low and high, not moderate. That to me that has a different definition with it. But so if I say medium, I actually mean moderate, because I guess moderate is the term that's used in the tool. So we made sure that, again, that Indiana guidance was the same for all of those categories. And we're going to go into that in a little bit more here. But again, when you're in a none category, we're talking about full width tillage in these cropping systems. We listed some implements there, but that's not an all-inclusive list. And then we kind of take that disturbance out as we move up higher and higher to the upper categories. So again, here's this guidance. I just kind of zoomed into it. None, low, moderate, and high. And that's the guidance that we've identified here. So I think the question, and I'm going to just answer this question first, and then we're going to kind of move on through this discussion here. So hopefully this kind of either sets you at ease, it allows you to kind of think about this process a little bit better and hopefully embrace it. But when do we go to the field, and when do we use the Indiana guidance, and all of those types of things? And so, we really want to embrace going to the field. I think that all of us became conservation planners and have the jobs that we have because we love working with farmers, and we actually like going to the field and seeing these things, but not just for our own benefit, but so that we can, show our farmers so that they can see these things. Like I said in my presentations on Tuesday and Thursday, so that we can provide information to the farmer so that they can make an educated decision on how to move forward on management. And that's not us just telling them that they have a problem. That's us showing them so they can see it with their own eyes and they own it. But still, we live in the world of CART, and we have this tool that we use. And so the things that we are going to promote is that we're using our Indiana guidance, and we're using that up front to kind of plug the applications in through the process. And then we're going to try to use the assessment here, like it says with CSP. If something doesn't meet eligibility criteria, or it doesn't rank out, right, because you have to meet 2 at time of application or exceed 2 at time of application, and all of those crazy chess type rules that we have here. If it's not meeting, then but you think that it should be meeting, then you need to go to the field to do the assessments to confirm that field should be ranked or scored at a higher threshold, and then you can go through that override process. And with EQIP, again, we're going to follow up, or we're going to do the interview method, and we're going to follow up with in-field assessments to help support implementing those practices on the farm, fine-tuning that practice implementation guide. I'm going to pause here a second. Shannon, is there anything that you want to add here or support with these statements as I put them here?
Yeah, just to make sure we're on the same page. National CART criteria for assessing the soil health resource concerns are, as Stephanie taught you on Tuesday or Thursday. You go in the field, you have a shovel, you got your bucket, and you sit on it, and you go start having fun with the soil. We realize that does not fit, especially with the CSP workflow program for that program, and so that's where we came up with the interview method, as we call it, to where if the farmer tells us their rotation, their tillage, their use of cover crops, etc., we can put them in the right CART category. However, at a minimum, we will still do soil health assessments on all of our conservation planning efforts. So for EQIP, if you make a decision on the interview method and you've never done a soil health assessment, but that plan gets funded, you will do a soil health assessment to make sure that the cover crop species, the rates, the seeding dates, termination dates, and everything else matches and addresses the resource concerns that are actually out there as based on that soil health assessment. For CSP, again, we'll do that in the in-field verification process so that we, again, tailor those enhancements, those practices specifically to address the resource concerns as identified by the soil health assessment that Stephanie taught you how to do.
All right, so again, CART is supposed to streamline this process. So I don't want you to worry about having to go out in the field up front when you're streamlining through this process, but hopefully that you can use these assessment tools as
Stephanie,
yes,
Stephanie
sir.
or Shannon, Dan Lazinski has a question.
So I'm curious as to your thoughts on what's the possibility once the application for EQIP's been selected for funding that we go into the field and that it changes our score and we have to go back in and do a modification?
I can answer that. So Dan, if you again, so let's say the farmer is a long-term no-tiller cover cropper, and we rate them out as high. So we kind of say, hey, there should be no soil health resource concerns. We go out, we do a soil health assessment, we find surface compaction or lack of aggregate stability, something to that effect. That's fine. But those practices that farmer agreed to do, like say maybe more cover crops, something else, we will tailor the specifics of that implementation of those practices to make sure we address the resource concerns that we have identified.
Or Shannon, or to maybe better address, because they, those resource concerns have been identified through that CART process, but now the practice implementation guide is going to better fine tune that practice implementation or
now,
on the landscape.
Let me go one step further, Dan. Let's say we rated them out as moderate, but come to find out that they actually use way more tillage than what they told us. Their rotation is totally different. That's where, again, we would have that soil health assessment, and we would say, you rate out very low on the assessment. We would have to get that conservation plan up to the speed to address those resource concerns for that producer to continue. If they say no, I don't want to do that, then we take that process and back it down. Very good question. Very good question.
All right, I'm going to keep going on here and keep thinking about some stuff here. So the next few slides, I actually just took those categories, none, low, moderate, and high, and just kind of talked about, what we were thinking about when we talk about none, and that definition that we identified there. And what we tend to see, and you all see this, right? Tillage equipment that fractures or turns over the entire width of the field. We see tillage frequency every year. And then we can potentially see multiple tillage passes or a single tillage pass, but we're seeing continued disturbance. And I do want to make clear that this is not an all-inclusive list of implements. So if someone's going to email me and say, well, what about this tool and what about that tool and what about this tool? Please don't. But just think about the fact that when we're having full width tillage, we're stirring the soil, we're turning it over. Those are the things that we've and it's pretty high disturbance systems. Then that's what we're thinking about. And the reason why we put these on here is if we start to think about our assessments, whenever we have tillage, we're impacting that soil cover. We are going to more often than not see that 75% residue cover after planting during that critical erosive period if we have tillage in this system, right? We are destroying or disturbing that residue breakdown or that natural decomposition process, and because we've kind of impacted those two, we are more than likely going to see surface crusts over a large area of our field. And then again, when we have that consistent disturbance, we're losing water stable aggregates. So do you kind of see like how we kind of just said, okay, these nones, we're seeing these tillage systems, and again, we may have a tillage system with some really high organic matter soil that the SCI is going to be great, but we could still go into that field and we're going to see compaction, we're going to see bare soil, we're going to not have residue breakdown, we're going to have surface crust. So again, that's why National took out the SCI numbers, and that's why we kind of tried to put these categories together like this. So we get into that low category again. This was where we still are having maybe some tillage in here, but it's shallow tillage. We wanted to limit it to our vertical tillage tools that for our primary crops. So this would be like a seed bed preparation practice. You're knocking down residue, but it's kind of staying over the surface because you're not burying it. And so what that would look like in fields when that happens, and you think about what those management practices are. So, and again, one pass per crop in rotation. Next is our moderate medium category. And again, we're looking more at these predominantly no-till systems. We're reducing that amount of disturbance, but we might still have a true vertical tillage type implement in there, something that is not disturbing the entire surface of that field and being used for the planting of cover crops. Again, if it's being used for seed bed prep before planting corn or beans, that doesn't fall in this category. This is only when that tool is used for seeding of cover crops in that system. And again, so these are just pictures to kind of help you think about the fact that we're really limiting that disturbance, but we're trying to get that benefit of having cover crop seeding, or like the picture here on the far right, this system might not have cover crops at all, but it's a full no-till system, right? So we have residues there. We're minimizing disturbance. We're limiting, surface crusting, and we're trying to build more water stable aggregates, but we might not have cover crops in that system. And then lastly, we have that high category. And the thing is I really think when we have this discussion, I think we all know what that category is, or what farmers that we work with that tend to fall into this system, right? That they've been utilizing cover crops for a very long period of time. They've made that decision that disturbance when they're planting their cover crops is not something that they want to do. They're really in a true no-till system. They're really they've modified their crop rotation so that they are finding those key times to get more cover out there, and they're really trying to build a system. And so, just trying to point that fact out that I think we all know what high is, and it's just that we tend to sparse out what falls in medium and what falls in low, and different things like that. So that's kind of how we tried to categorize these. Again, we've maximized soil cover here. We are having residue breakdown. We typically don't see very many crusts in these systems, and we're really trying to build those aggregates and have those plant roots be in the soil growing all the time. Right, I'm going to stop here just a second. Is there any questions about that? All right, so what I'm going to kind of go through now is, again, a little bit of discussion on what the national guidance is for the infield soil health assessment, and then again, just kind of touching briefly on kind of how we've recommend to do that. So this again comes from our Excel spreadsheet that was shared, the Indiana tool. And it's those green boxes, so it's that national reference. And so it lists the infield soil health assessments that can be done for organic matter depletion, but it's not quite that simple for if when the time comes to do these infield assessments, because CART has said that if you go out and you do the assessments, if you answer yes to 2 or less of the infield soil health assessments, then your field is considered none. If you answer yes to 3 of the infield soil health indicators or assessments, then you're a low. And moderate, you're answering yes to 4, and high, you're answering yes to 5. So if you think about how we talked about evaluating resource concerns and doing the infield soil health assessment on Tuesday and Thursday, I talked about how it's like that purpose was to look if there was a resource concern there or not, and you just had to answer no to 2, and you could really easily, you know, if you answered no to 2, you could say check that box for organic matter depletion and walk away because you didn't meet 2 of the assessments, and so that resource concern was present. But CARD has upped the ante a little bit, because instead of looking for no's, right, it's telling us that we now need to look for yeses. Which then puts the onus on the planner to actually do more of the assessments. And so hopefully we again are going to fine tune this process. And I identified 6 assessments that that can be done on 3 of the 4 soil health resource concerns. And so this will be kind of an interesting process if we need to do this in this pre-planning process with CART. Again, our guidance here for us with the none, low, moderate, and high, again, is to follow our interview method that we've identified here for those categories. Soil organism habitat loss or degradation. Again, this comes from that spreadsheet. It has a bulleted list of enhancements or of assessments that we could do for this resource concern. And again, soil organism habitat loss or degradation in CART, it says it gives indicators of answering yes to 1 or less. And if you can't answer any more than yes to 1 of those assessments, then your field or that site is considered to be a none in none category. And then again, that moves up for your low categories. You're answering yes to 2 or 3 of the soil health assessments. Moderate, you're answering yes to 3 or 4 of the assessments. And then finally, with your high, you're answering yes to 3 or more of the indicators, as well as you must answer yes to water stable aggregates. So they've put some caveats on high for some of these resource concerns. If we are going to be high for soil organism habitat loss or degradation, if you're going to be a high category, you have to have water stable aggregates. Again, our guidance in this process is listed here. I just keep going back to this slide because I think that this is the one that you really want to hang on to as we're doing this, as we're doing these CART assessments. Aggregate stability, but actually the resource concern is instability. We list those resource concerns that can be used, or these assessments that can be used for the resource concern. And again, I know that this probably makes sense to everyone, but I want to make it clear. If aggregate stability is the goal and aggregate instability is our resource concern, so no matter what we do for this none, low, moderate, and high, water stable aggregates is going to be a priority that they're going to be looking for, or it's going to be absent through this process. So like here, low, even if you have multiple assessments that you meet, if you don't meet water stable aggregates, you can't get any higher than a low. And then as you go up, you have to have water stable aggregates along with other indicators to meet those categories.
Stephanie?
Yes,
We have a
sir.
question. Where are the interview questions located?
These you mean these the Indiana guidance questions? They're in that Indiana spreadsheet that was shared in a bulletin. Shannon, was that on Monday or Tuesday that was released?
Wednesday.
Wednesday. Okay.
Well, maybe,
so
maybe
those,
Tuesday, one of them. Yeah.
So yeah, those are in that. I can't report tool questions. I can't remember what it's called. It's a long name. But that would be, I think it came from Shelby. Would have been the Shelby Ruffner, I think, was the one that sent that out, and that is where you find these questions.
Okay. All
right. Compaction. Again, that resource concern has 5 assessments that can be done for that. And of course, compaction always gets to be the one that's different from all the rest because it is evaluated a little bit more differently. But it doesn't go through the none, low, moderate, or high. Compaction is either significant or not significant. And the national guidance listed these criteria of no observed evidence of compaction, ponding, stunted plant growth, or root growth limitations, and a penetrometer reading. Or do the infield soil health assessment worksheet, which ironically looks at all of those things in the worksheet. So I feel like they just listed out the worksheet requirements and the bullet above and then said, well, or you can do the assessment worksheet. Again, if compaction is significant, then we are seeing evidence of those things: compaction, ponding, stunted plant growth, root growth limitations, and all of those things. And you have penetrometer readings that are greater than 150 psi in the top 6 inches and greater than 300 in the 6 to 18th inch depth. Or again, you could just very easily do all of that in the infield soil health assessment worksheet. So our guidance for compaction kind of we do have these interview processes, which again rely on that discussion with that farmer and all of those conversations that are extremely important. And then I know that we probably try to do some field visits and kind of looking over some sites. And so here we talked about, we're not using tillage in these systems for compaction to not be significant. We identified not having used tillage for more than 3 years so that it's adopted. And then also the thing is that we want to make really clear, and I think all of you know this, is that as soon as you stop tilling a field, that doesn't mean that compaction goes away. That means that for many years, depending on the management on the landscape, our farmer is in a transitional tillage system. They're still dealing with the effects of compaction and root restricting layers and slow infiltration further down in the soil profile, because that compaction is still there, rearing its ugly head in our systems. And so that's why we kind of picked that 3-year number, because hopefully by that point in time, we've gotten some plant roots to penetrate that. We're starting to see that bulk density in those surface layers start to decrease as we are having our pores be continuity, where we're tending to have more of those pores stay there. They're not getting destroyed. And so we can start to see maybe some of those changes after about 3 years. All right, I have a couple slides from CART, but I'm going to stop and just see if there's any questions at all. Or Shannon, or if you have any comments to discuss or support.
Nope, you're good. See if there's any questions.
People have been actually answering each other's questions in chat.
I love this. This is so awesome. You guys are so great. Woo! Okay, so I'm going to just kind of go into CART again, and just I think I showed some of these slides on Monday, but again, just to kind of touch back on these again as we've walked through this whole process. Hopefully some of these things hit home. So as we answer these questions, you know, our compaction question of compaction is not significant, or compaction is significant. This is the question that we answer in CART. But ironically, there is a threshold that's established for compaction based on our web services, based on the field boundaries that we clip out there. And again, that's whether our threshold is going to be 50, 30, or 1. I don't think I've ever seen a 1, to be honest with you, for compaction potential out there. And I think that this actually might be a little bit new this year, but so we either have high potential or medium potential for compaction, and then that threshold is established. The planners, even though this web service process happens in the background, our planners still have to select whether compaction is significant or not. It's just that web service process is determining, I guess, the potential severity and the significance of that compaction. And that goes back to some of those things that we talked about on Monday. Is it a high clay soil, the amount of silt in relationship to clay, other things like that, so that are those soils susceptible to compaction being a problem?
Do you have time for a question, Stephanie?
Well, certainly.
If we do the 11-factor assessment that you talked about yesterday, will it translate perfectly over to all the questions you're covering today?
Oh, I like that. Whoever put the word perfectly in there is looking for a big fat no as the answer to that question, right? I don't think there's anything in life that's perfect. That's just like saying always and never.
Do they translate well?
Oh, that's good. So I think, okay, if you do the 11-factor assessment, if you notice, and I'm going to back up just a few slides here. And this is just that aggregate stability. So if you do those 11 factors, again, then you're going to have to say, okay, did I answer yes to the assessments that impact aggregate stability? Did I answer yes to 3 of those? Did I answer yes to water stable aggregates? And so if we're looking at answering these for, using that process for CART up front, then we have to follow the national guidance and the CART rules. So then we have to be able to say how many of these assessments did we answer yes to, and do those assessments impact the soil health resource concern? Again, because there's certain assessments that only fit for one resource concern or the other. Take penetration resistance. That only impacts compaction. You don't see penetration resistance in the other 3. So I hope that answers that question. But if you do the assessments, then you have to come here and then determine, how many meet for each of those resource concerns, and then you answer those questions accordingly. All right, I'm going to move on to the next one within CART. Again, just a reminder again, so we have a software answered question, right? In the background, CART is looking at those soils, that NRCS data, those inherent soil properties that we talked about, to then determine if a PLU that you're answering the assessment on, if that has high, moderately, moderately low, or low depletion potential. And you could click on any of these boxes till the cows come home, and it's not going to change because that's already been a web service answered question. And this just determines that threshold as to what our existing conditions, our existing practices, and our planned practices are being, rated towards. And so all of these, because my organic matter depletion was moderately high, all of these other options for answering questions are all grayed out. I cannot select them, and the only one I can select is moderately high. And moderately high has a threshold of 50. So that's just something, again, as we think about walking through these, it's just that awareness of how this is all tied together. And then this is the question that you're going to answer, right? It's going to go right back to those categories that we talked about before, with either that interview method or the a little bit more complicated method that the national office identifies with the in-field assessment and certain numbers of each assessment meeting for each of those categories: none, low, moderate, or high. And so that's the question that we answer that inputs the points into CART. Soil organism habitat loss or degradation. Again, there's that software to answer process in the background based on the favorability of a soil for organism habitat, or I guess very favorable for habitat or not favorable for habitat. So those are the terms that they use. And again, that software answered question, and then we just go in and we answered only the one that we can open. Sometimes you're going to see more than one open, right? Or more than one active, because some fields might be very favorable and some fields might only be somewhat favorable. And they have different thresholds, which then forces you to answer that question for more than one of these categories. But again, in this situation with the fields that I clipped and put in CD, they were all somewhat favorable. And then lastly, our aggregate instability. Again, there's that software answered question, and then we then answer that corresponding category there. And again, that software answered question is only determining our threshold here, and then we input all the information that goes towards that, that goes towards the points that we get. And again, I think we've talked about this before, but again, and I know Jennifer's going to go into this more, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this slide. She's going to talk about all this. But I think the one thing I do want to hit on here is that, I guess before I move forward, do we have any questions? Phew. All
hey,
right.
Stephanie, this is Shannon. Not to let everybody's hopes down, but Jennifer's not able to join us today, so I will be covering that. So.
Oh, hold on. I'm gonna mute while I go. No, no, just kidding. I know you're gonna do a great job, Shannon. I'm just always so used to listening to Jennifer do that, and I assumed and we miss her already. All right, so I think the thing that I kind of want to talk about here, because I've had a lot of discussions with people kind of on the side, these assessments and what farmers are doing for management practices, and why do we have to go through this process? And I guess I just want to kind of, this is in particularly looking at some fields that we know are in soil health management systems. And I know that all of you have been out on these fields, and guess what we still see out there? We still see horizontal fracturing, and we still see platy structure, and we keep thinking, why the heck are we still seeing all of these things in these no-till fields or these soil health systems? So I have a picture here of a soil health system, a field that's been in no-till or some type of reduced tillage farming practices for many, many years, and has diversified the crop rotation and different things like that. And right here, we see a more of a compacted layer. Do we see how that sticks out? There might even be some platy structure there. And we see that again right down here. Those dang layers keep just rearing their ugly heads when we look at doing these things. But one of the things that I also want you to notice is, look at this beautiful earthworm channel that's below those compacted layers. Look at those aggregates that we're seeing throughout the soil profile. So sometimes when we look at doing these things in our soil health systems, that's why I pushed so hard about looking for those plant roots and looking at like if there are platy layers, how strong are they? Are they well developed, or is our management system, is are the plant roots and our cover crops, are they destroying or obliterating that platy layer, and working through it and working through those compacted layers? Here's another great picture of something to think about with that. Just, again, we got a long-term no-till field. This was in wheat and harvested this summer and then planted to a cover crop. It was kind of dry around the area, so our plant roots probably didn't get as deep as we had wanted. But what are we seeing right here? We're seeing evidence of, again, a compacted layer through there. But look at the aggregates that we're seeing above this and forming around the plant roots. We actually are seeing even a little bit of like those plant roots are hitting that area, but guess what they did? They punched right through it, and they were able to keep going here. They didn't go completely sideways in this situation. They kind of modified just a little bit and made their way through those layers. And so again, trying to look for these things if we do end up going out in the field to do this with our farmers that are already in these systems, because I think Dan's question kind of hit on this. Like, what if we go to a no-till field and it looks like crap, right? I think that's what Dan's question was, and the way that he would really ask it if he wasn't being recorded here. So that's and these are some of the things that we might see out there. So then we're going to start talking about how do we put a practice implementation guide together? How do we develop a cover crop mix or cover crop practices to start to address these things even more? So that's some of the things that are worth thinking about as we move forward with this assessment. And again, thinking about these platy layers, the long-term no-till field, cover crops in here, and I see a platy layer, a platy layer, a platy layer, and I try not to panic about it, right? Because I'm like, oh crap, why is this not going away? Open that up, look at those plant roots, see that, confirm to yourself that those plant roots are punching through that and really making things happen in these systems. Look at that surface, look at how those plant roots, they are straight. They are not modified, growing along that plane. That really does tell us that we are seeing this system working and doing what it's supposed to be doing. It took how many hundreds of years to destroy some of these or degrade these layers down to where we are. It's going to take a lot of work and intensive and intentional management to in our soil health systems to build these things back up. And again, that platy structure and that horizontal fracturing and penetration resistance, they become the predominant issues in those fields where those resource concerns are present, right? And those other ones, we were like, I see a horizontal fracture layer, but my roots don't give a crap. They're going through it. Here, I see a horizontal layer, and I have a radish tuber that has completely modified its growth structure just to make it through there. I'm seeing some platy structure, and I see a soybean root that has completely modified its growth structure just to continue to survive. So those are the things that you really want to look for here, is those issues of how are these assessments or things that when we start to see those things in the field, how does that play into the systems that we're going to go look at. And then also kind of, I just wanted to give you some insight into how we put those responses together for those categories for the Indiana guidance, that none, low, moderate, and high. I mean, when we go out to these fields, we tend to see some of these things, and how do we respond to them? And then do we know that the system is functioning or not? So that's some of the stuff that I had tried to put together when making those guidance documents, and then the things that I think about when I go out into a field. All right, I have about 5 slides on erosion. So let's talk soil erosion. I think that was the other thing Shannon wanted me to talk about today. Woohoo! So our soil erosion kind of is that and our soil health resource concerns are really intricately linked. And sometimes, especially if we're going to do a site visit or visual observation on these things, right? There's only a certain critical period of time where we can go to look at these. And these pictures here were all taken at that critical erosive period, as you can tell. But sometimes we don't always get out there at that optimal period of time, but so we can still see some evidence of erosion that, we see those yellowish strips of the field. Those were all gullies that the corn didn't drown out when or get washed out when it rained, but those gullies were formed. And so then those are stressed areas of the field. And so as you look at some of these things, that can kind of support stuff that you're, talking to the farmer with his or her management system, and then looking at some of that imagery as we try to streamline this process as well as possible. So again, this cover residue biomass question goes back into our Indiana guidance, and really that's where we're really going to sit with a lot of these questions and responses. But I did want to briefly go into the background of how CART figured this out. Go on, Stephen.
Before you dive into that, we have 2 questions. Would you like to address?
Sure. And actually, when you ask questions about soil erosion or these other things, I think it's fair game if Victor has a response or Tony has a response. I think I just drew the short straw on getting to talk about this today. So anyway, or Shannon, you're more than welcome to respond as well, but let's hear them.
Okay, one is a lot of variability could exist from one dig assessment. I'm concerned about the scope of how many acres can exist with our EQIP contracts, especially now that CAPS can now include so many acres. How do we approach this dilemma?
Oh, okay. We're back talking about infield soil health assessments. So I know that we talked about combining fields and trying to look at management units and things like that. And I think that I only talked about that. I would call that lightly in the sessions on Tuesday and Thursday. And I'm not really sure if we're going to talk about this in much in depth here. But what I want you to think about for these assessments, if we are trying to merge fields and combine management units and try to look at this on larger areas, is that we are trying to look at the average condition for a site. We are trying to get some general information to help guide us through this process. And that if we, if we want to look at every single acre of a field, then we're back into that idea of grid sampling for soil health assessments. And we definitely don't want to do that, because a farmer's not going to change his or her management, whether that be tillage practices or cover crops, on a per acre basis within a field. So we want to try to get that general or average condition, but then also be aware that if we're looking at predominant soil types and we know that we have more erosive field soils on that field, that we may want to evaluate that as well to give recommendations that more meet those soils, or make that farmer aware that the recommendations that are being put forward are for, from the evaluation that we did on this soil type, but that these other areas may be more conducive to erosion or less conducive to erosion. So, or organic matter depletion or things like that.
Okay, another soil erosion question. In Indiana, are there months that are considered critical erosion time, or is that just based on, idiosyncratic circumstances?
I am guessing dollars to donuts that the person who typed that message, Stephen, did not say idiosyncratic. That is totally a Stephen Ball word.
And there you go.
But that being said, I don't know if there's specific months identified, but we generally tend to talk about those critical erosion periods when the soil is the most bare, or the soil is the most susceptible to degradation from erosion. And typically that has been right after planting. Again, because we think about historically, what has that meant for planting? That has meant that the farmer has come in and worked the field in the spring and done seedbed preparation, and that need and desire to have a clean seedbed so we can plant our plants in there, plant our seeds in there, and have successful growth. And so typically our fields are very sensitive or very susceptible to erosion right after planting. So that's where that has kind of come from as a default. But the other thing to think about would be like if you have an extensive fallow period where the field is worked or left bare for long periods of time, that might be the other time where you would want to evaluate it as well. Victor, is there anything that you want to add there to support my statement?
Well, you covered it pretty good. I think one thing to think about is, and when that was originally looked at, they were trying to figure out any time frame when any type of tillage operation may be going on, and how that can merges with a time frame or a month or period when we would have a lot of rainfall. And so, if you have a month, say you normally might have more rain, such as April, and that is going on at the same time as the same period you may also have some more tillage traditionally, then that dictates a time frame where you certainly could have more erosion.
Awesome. So I might just skip over this because this might be more than what you want, but I know that, like I said, I drew the short straw on erosion and cart. But one of the things I wanted to kind of point out is some of the erosion thresholds that have been identified in cart. And the two things that go into evaluating or determining that threshold for the erosion resource concern is looking at the modified erodibility potential for water. And it gives it either a low, moderate, moderately high, or high potential. And the bullets below kind of go into how they determine that. And then also it is the R factor for the site in question, for where the PLU is located in the world. And I think most of our R factors within Indiana, like in this map here, fall just under that 150 to just to close to 250 range. And so these are going to be our thresholds for erosion for a lot of our fields that we evaluate. The thing is that I think is so interesting is just like compaction, CART doesn't go into here's your web service answered response and here's your web service this, that, or the other. You just simply answer that question of the cover residue biomass question. But in the background, these are the things that are happening. And I know that for a lot of people, these soil questions, in particular soil erosion, tends to be a problem because we might have this 2-acre field that has some horrible HEL soil, and that 1 2-acre field is making the whole application ineligible because of this information right here. So that's where these things are coming from. I think the only other thing I had here was that when you click soil erosion, this is the other question that comes up to be answered in CART. And just the guidance that we've put together is that the highest risk crop in the rotation should be selected from the crop group to inform that, it says to inform the pesticide use risk category choice, again, which I think is ironic because it comes up when you click the soil erosion question. But that's neither here nor there. That's just what it is. Shannon, I'm prepared to quit now because I'm 6 minutes over and it's just, we can't do this again. So you can take over.
All right.
Hand it off to the next person.
It's on to Tony, but I guess let's pause and make sure there aren't any questions for you, Stephanie. All right. Thanks, everybody. Take it away. Tony.
Yeah, sure. Trying to make that transition, and I might have clicked on the wrong presentation. All right, we'll see if we got this going now. All right, so a little bit transition here. One last thing I'll just add to the discussion about erosion. It's been interesting for me to see the number of fields that have worked up perfectly this fall. and it's sad for me to see them. Have been worked up perfectly, and here we are, November, December, and 5 months until planting, and we know they'll have to do some more tillage. So, all right, able to see that all right now, Shannon? Or Stephen?
Yep.
Okay,
Yes.
very good. All right, very good. All right, so last few days, we've been talking about various resource concerns, conservation planning on cropland, talking about the water quality and other resource concerns, and trying to dive in, talk a little bit more specifically about pesticides and pest management, nutrients and nutrient management, and then a little bit on pathogens as well. And so now we wanted to discuss that a little bit further and how those various resource concerns fit into the CART questions and assessments. So I'll try and hit on that here. So related to the FY21 CART assessment questions that just came out recently, came out this week. When the cropland use is selected, I think most of you are familiar with this, various resource concerns automatically need some attention. There are those that are highlighted that we automatically need to focus on. So we're gonna look a little bit at the field sediment, the nutrient, and the pathogen loss. Within that, these CART assessment questions for the nutrient and sediment loss, for the nutrients, it simply asks if nutrients are or are not applied. Doesn't talk about soil tests or application rates or anything else like that. It's just whether or not we're using those. And this is for the runoff or leaching analysis. And in almost all cases, we can assume that nutrients are applied on the cropland. Pretty rare that we wouldn't be applying nutrients to some degree. And then for the sediment, the runoff analysis, the assessment pulls from the cover, the residue, the biomass, crop rotation questions. I think Stephanie alluded to some of this a little bit previously, that there's some of these others that, assessments, the questions that get pulled into other sections, other resource concerns. Any more to add on nutrient sediment loss, Shannon?
Nope. If there's any questions.
All right. So, then related to the field pathogen loss assessment, can come into play if the crop is grazed or manure, compost, or biosolids are applied. If either of those are selected, then the questions related to those pathogen resource concerns come into play. Again, hopefully, I'm assuming you're probably pretty familiar with this part. Part we're probably thinking a little bit more about is how the method or placement of the manure has an impact, and impacting the points awarded or not awarded in that case. So it's not asking the amount of residue cover after the application. It doesn't care if we're at the 75% or whatever for this resource concern, or if the manure is applied to a cover crop. Although we know in most cases, we'd much rather have some of that residue left or cover crops included within that manure application, but those are not being addressed within CART. It's simply asking if the manure was left on the surface without incorporation. And if it's without incorporation in any manner, that's the 0 points. It doesn't go into whether it's frozen, snow, ice covered ground or not. It's just being left on the surface. If the manure is incorporated or injected, again, in any manner, it doesn't talk about implements, it doesn't talk about how much incorporation, but it does clarify and say soon after application. And again, soon has not been defined. So, if we've made an application on that frozen or snow covered ground and it sat there in December, if we had snow and it didn't get incorporated until February or March, then that would not meet my definition of soon. So just to keep that in mind. And then if that application has happened soon, then it would be the 51 points. And then if no manure, it'd be 60 points. And in all cases, if possible, we want to try and encourage those producers to use low disturbance injectors when we're making those liquid applications. We'd much rather see some of that. And also related to the livestock question, this answer has no impact related to this. So if you choose manure if we're leaving it on the surface, if there's a pathogen resource concern, or not applicable if it's not a risk, if it's managed, or if cover crops were included. Any other comments or questions with that? All right, moving on to pest management and integrated pest management. Pesticides, various aspects of these are also assessed within CART. Talked about this previously, a little bit more challenging for us, but hopefully the questions are fairly basic in nature. For the most, the field pesticide loss is only required for the cropland CSP. So won't really need to be addressing that otherwise, but it does get pulled up under the CSP for cropland. When assessing for those pesticide losses, only the orchard or vegetable crops, turf grass, nursery, only those make a difference. We would have some of those in Indiana, but not as many. Those items circled down on the bottom right, more common in Indiana, small grains or corn and soy rotation, something like that. A few others might come into play here, but less likely. For the pesticides, the soil runoff, the assessment pulls from that cover residue biomass crop rotation question that was alluded to previously. Just looks to see if, when those products are applied, how much residue, how much cover we have there, and if that's being controlled or not. The other piece of this, integrated pest management, does come into play when assessing pesticide loss and water quality impacts. We have a little bit of a variety of how integrated pest management is defined. And so on this, the assessment, I ask if a full system of 595 has been implemented. Usually that's not the case. Usually it's only if EQIP or previous CSP has been included. However, this is where the interview and the questions that we've talked about previously with a producer would help to answer some of these questions. So whether or not they do scouting, whether or not they make their own pesticide applications, what other strategies they employ related to their IPM. But in almost all cases, we could assume that pesticides are used to control those pests. Hopefully they are using scouting. We've got cases of other things, products being applied, and it's the timing, it's when it's being done, it's and so hopefully that's not the case. That's not what we're seeing here. Related to the integrated pest management with the water quality, a little bit challenging. We start looking at the that Indiana guidance that we provided there. Again, if that full 595 implemented through EQIP or CSP, more likely we put in here about the neonicotinoid seed treatments. Trying to reduce those, particularly on soybeans. It's rare that that's really needed on soybeans. There are some cases, and hopefully that's being thought about. Then the full IPM system for efficient production, general production purposes, includes a full level of the PAMs, the prevention, avoidance, monitoring, and suppression, but not to that 595 level. So a lot of the way, but maybe not fully implemented as we would define it. Then in a few cases, if probably a little more likely if no IPM is being utilized, and so You know, little scouting is employed. It's just business as usual. And so, and I think this is one of the things to kind of think about. Just because pesticides are used, we should not assume IPM is used. Unfortunately, we certainly like to see more of that done. I think that's why this was reflected as it was within the national, and why we included our guidance as we did as well. Related to the plant pest pressure, we talked about this over the last couple of days. Herbicide-resistant weeds. You know, it makes sense that this fits in here. We talked about the threat that herbicide-resistant weeds are to conservation agriculture, conservation cropping systems. As we have more herbicide resistance, we're more likely, in some cases, to recommend more tillage to control those weeds. And so we want to make sure we can do what we can to reduce the impact of those products. And I think so just how those products are included. But on this one, you know, we're looking at the that there is no IPM, that those pesticides are not used to control the pest. Sorry about that. I was getting ahead on a slide there.
Hey, Tony, do you have time for a question?
Sure.
Could you clarify, expand on the other? It's invasives, 2 slides back. How do we document that the customer is managing off-site?
Was that Shannon?
I'll be covering the. Oh, I'm sorry. Are you talking the invasives?
Which slide? Sorry.
The invasives, one more slide back, I believe.
And I'll be covering that later on the forestry part.
Okay.
Thanks, Kara.
All right. So I mentioned, unfortunately, I got a little bit ahead there. Talk about the concerns related to herbicide-resistant weeds. Trying to do what we can to ensure that we don't have that as an issue. That you know, whether whoever's doing the spraying, I think that's a real question. Is you know, if we have escapes out there, we have HR weeds to go back and do some diagnostics and figure out what happened. Is it related to just this farmer or this farm? Is it related to the co-op? You know, what's going on? Selection of herbicides. What do we do to try and mitigate that? You know, we only have so many chemistries available. We want to make sure we're rotating those chemistries. Want to make sure we're not using the same thing over and over again. You know, a few years ago, a number of years ago now, 20 plus years ago, we came in with Roundup Ready soybeans. Great opportunity, great thing. And my next concern with that is when we came in with Roundup Ready corn. And, you know, we had some farmers that right away said, awesome. Now I know which single product I can use for both my crops. And where we're at today with herbicide resistance. So making sure that we're rotating those products, that we're encouraging that, and that we're looking into that. So related to this, the plant pest pressure talks about how much of a resistance there is in the PLU if we're at 25% or more. If we're less than, we can give it those 51 points. If we're more than 25%, we're just going to give them the 40 points. And we have a larger amount of herbicide resistant weeds than either 1 or 0 points. So again, you know, it's probably something we haven't talked a lot about. We kind of know it's out there, you know, how we think about this, but the importance of it and how it relates to conservation agriculture is important. So just trying to make sure that we keep that in mind as well. All right, Shannon, do you have any other things you wanted to add to this, or are there any other questions?
No, just on the other land uses, we'll get into those plant pest pressure specifics in the other land uses like forestry and pasture. Just know also, I think as Tony alluded to, this resource concern is typically not one we would do during normal conservation planning unless we noticed or noticed, herbicide resistant weeds on our cropland. Most farmers hopefully know that they've got that problem. Again, we can work with them with 595 and others, but again, we'll get into the other ones that have a little more applicability to the invasives and other typical plant pests when we talk about our pastures and our forest. But again, this is a resource concern that is required for CSP, not required for general planning / EQIP.
All right, I think that was all that I had. Make sure I'm no longer sharing, and I think it's to you, Shannon.
All right. So that was quite a bit of very, very, very pertinent information. I really applaud my technical experts. This part of it was the agronomists, of course, for coming up with some good, solid Indiana guidance to help you as a conservation planner navigate that, what you see on the land, what the farmers tell you, how to get that into cart, and hopefully how to make that that next process that much more simplified and doable. Again, we're not taking away our technical expertise. We still want us to be in the field with our farmers on the land talking about these things, but just trying to help you understand what cart needs fed with. And then in the afternoon, we'll kind of see what it spits out. So I can't imagine you don't have questions. So let's please take this opportunity to ask Tony and Stephanie any questions you may have on what they covered. Feel free to unmute your mic or type it in the chat. Appreciate the positive feedback too. That really does help. Thanks a bunch, Doris and Kara and everybody. No questions at all. Okay, well, again, once we probably dive back into our big conservation planning efforts this winter because of our program applications and everything, I'm sure you'll come across some unique situations that don't quite fit perfectly into these square peggy holes that CART has. By all means, as you run into these unique situations with your clients, float those situations up to your resource management specialist, float those up to the state office. We'll provide as much consistent guidance across the state as we can, so that at least we have a consistent way of plugging this farmer's management system into the right cart place and this next one into the right cart place, and so that they all shake out where they do. So again, I'll pause just for a couple more minutes, and I guess here you go. Here's what we'll do. Us on the state office, we will stay on the Teams meeting. If you have no questions, you are welcome to take a lunch. We will reconvene at 1. If you would like to stick around and ask a question, maybe more on a personal note, that's fine. We will stay on and see what kind of concerns or questions you may have. So thanks a bunch, everybody, for your time. We will see you back here at 1 p.m. Eastern time, please, and we'll keep on the good work.
And even if you have a question, you can still take a lunch. Just because Shannon, you made it sound like if they had a question, they weren't going to get to take a lunch, and so that's a good. We still want you to take a lunch. Please take a lunch.
It's called a disincentive.
Well, we will shut this down at 1 o'clock or at 12 o'clock. How about that? At 12 o'clock, we will shut this down so we can all take a lunch. If everyone leaves, we'll take an early lunch.
And please remember, when you do leave, click the red leave button because you're going to be reconnecting to a different Teams meeting this afternoon. Thanks.
Great job, guys. I thought you covered that very well.
It's been a lot
Very well.
better interaction in the later meetings. I mean, I especially like the fact they answer each other's questions in chat.
I like
Yeah.
that too. I like the scolding I got from Andrew. That was pretty nice. It should be a privilege to talk about soil erosion. I thought that was pretty funny.
Yeah, that was really cool. We got some great conservationists here, I tell you. Makes me proud.
I will say I was actually a little bit surprised by that. Like I followed up and like that was in the email from yesterday. I was like, oh, I'm talking about erosion. Okay, got it. Pull some slides quick.
You did it great. I mean, good.
We don't get serious enough with erosion.
I agree with you on that, Victor. That's true.
It's all the name change, I think.
Oh, instead of the Soil Conservation Service, we're going to take it all the way back to that, Stephen, and be like,
I'm an
as soon as we-
archaeologist. I mean, for crying out loud, there's still people alive, who work for the Soil Conservation Service.
Steven's still digging people out from the Dust Bowl.
And they would appreciate some soil erosion, technical knowledge.
Digging people out from the Dust Bowl.
It's a Pompeii-like situation.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's always better to get done early than to go till late. And that's not saying anything about you, Stephanie. You had a lot of good information on Tuesday and Thursday, but
Then to go too long. No, that's okay. You can say it. Just call it out. That's okay.
We got back to 10 minutes that she took from us yesterday on every presentation.
Well, I've noticed now. I was looking and it was like 43 minutes, and I was like, I only had 40 minutes. I'm gonna just quit right now. And I only had like 2 slides left. But then I realized I think I had 40 minutes for soil health and 5 minutes for erosion. But I was just like, you know what? We gotta just be done. Someone's gonna call me out on talking too much.
I was really surprised you left me as much time as you did. Thanks.
You say it in such a nice but almost backhanded way, Tony. I so appreciate that.
It was such a surprise.
It's often not the case.
But
hey, I was before lunch. I knew I'd be done on time.
In all honesty, I probably should have dove in and just got the 4 she knocked out. But oh well, we should have plenty of time.
There was a lot of stuff though this morning. It wasn't worth sitting on here too much longer. I mean,
Yeah.
Get an hour and a half or an hour in there, and it's like people just start to check out after a while. I mean, no offense, Tony, but I actually had to clip my toenails, so I clipped my toenails while you were talking.
Angie has a question in chat if anyone wishes to address it.
Yes, we will do that. Thank you, Stephen.
All right.
Are we still being recorded?
You are. It's embarrassing.
That's okay. We can edit that out. I'm not too worried about that.
You want me to end that? I will stop recording now.
Yeah.